Hey everyone, this is Devin Francis, and it's Victoria, and we are on the way to our graduation.
Yay!
Ah!
Victoria Francis.
Woo!
Victoria will be attending Selkirk College in order to major in English. She hopes to become a librarian.
Victoria is receiving the Jack Charters Rotary Scholarship in English and Journalism, as presented by Lorraine Hudson. She's also receiving the Robson Women's Institute Scholarship, as well as the Selkirk College Board of Governors Secondary Graduates Award, as presented by Cheryl Wallace. And lastly, the Selkirk College Entrance Award, Dick Fowler Memorial Scholarship, also presented by Cheryl Wallace.
Megan Gayton B.
I'm pleased to introduce Victoria Francis and Jonathan Smith. Victoria, or Twar as she is known to friends, is an accomplished student, flute and piano player, piano teacher, and active community and church member. She loves books, all things Disney, and nicknaming other people. Her favorite quote is, "I'm not saying you're making this difficult, but you could make this a lot easier." She plans on taking her passion for books into a career as a librarian.
Hey everybody!
Hey, Macarena.
We're back here today. Big congratulations to the person that you just watched graduate, Victoria. Huzzah! Exciting. Yeah, Victoria's all done with high school. High five. Yeah. That's super exciting.
I'd like to thank the Academy for everything.
You like me. You
You
really,
really like me.
Topical. Also, it's exciting because it means that we can record now more because Victoria doesn't have homework. Okay. What are we doing today, Victoria? What is this weird verses I see in the title below?
I don't know, Devin. What is it?
This is going to be one of those topical things where YouTube's going to change their layout again and the title's going to be like on the right of the video or something, and then it's going to make no sense anymore. Like those super old YouTube videos.
I was pretending to look at a script.
Oh. I said the title down below because YouTube. It's like there's super old videos on YouTube, I remember, and they'd be like, look at the description on the right because the description used to be on the right side of the video.
Anyway.
So, what is Verses, Victoria?
Verses is a Oddcast series that I came up with where we take old episodes which were deleted. So, just so you know, we're going to summarize them in, pretty good detail.
Yes, much more than normal.
So you know what happens, because lots of them are going to be Harley episodes. And so lots of you guys probably have not heard of them.
Or heard them.
Or heard of them in some cases, too. So,
well, they would have heard of them if they listened to this podcast.
Yeah. So lots of people haven't heard of the Harley episodes because they all centered around or had in them a character named Officer David Harley, who later went on to being kind of Harlow Doyle-ish. Anyway, he was kind of a bumbling cop, and some parents took offense to this and wrote into Focus that police people should not act like that, and it was kind of inappropriate. So they deleted all the episodes, and then they remade them with different.
But yeah.
Most of them, and then they remade them with different plots. So we're comparing the old episodes to the new ones.
Yes, so the first Verses one that we're doing, and there's other things too that could also be versesed. So, I mean, we may see other ones in the future, other comparisons besides Harley episodes and their remakes, but we are starting out with both of our favorite Harley episode, which is episodes 70 and 71, The Return of Harley, Parts 1 and 2, written by Phil Lawler, and its remake, episode 255, The Boy Who Cried Destructo, also written by Phil Lawler. I was actually, when I was getting ready for this episode, I had some questions about stuff, so I messaged Phil on Facebook and I was asking about it. He'd completely forgotten that there even was a remake of The Return of Harley. He completely forgot it existed, despite the fact that he was the one who wrote it.
I'm just going to say The Boy Who Cried Destructo was one of my favorite episodes ever. And then once we finally got the Harley episodes, The Return of Harley became one of my favorite two-parters ever.
So, what we're going to do is first this is sort of like a review, but we're not going to spend as much time looking at the individual episode. So basically, we want to pit one episode against the other, figure out which one is a better version. So I will summarize the plot of the original. Victoria will summarize the plot of the remake in ways that, you can compare against each other. And then we will go over some notes about points in the episode, both that are comparing notes and notes about the differences, and just kind of notes in general too. And then we're going to discuss, our conclusion. Which one is the better episode?
Ding ding! Battle of the episodes, time to begin.
All right, Return of Harley, parts 1 and 2. Okay, so here's our plot summary. Jack Davis is trying to kill time, but his parents are annoyed by his imagination. Officer David Harley pulls up on a motorcycle. Jack doesn't recognize him because of the helmet. And there's a line about Roger, and who's Roger, which also stuck around. They ride up to Trickle Lake. They find a mysterious van, suspicious men, and a cave. David Harley goes to ask them questions and careens down an embankment. Jack runs back to town, pursued by the bootleggers. Connie is learning how to drive. Jack tells Whit and Connie what happened. Jack, Whit, Connie, and the Davises go up to the cave and find nothing. No one believes Jack. Jack gets threatened by one of the bootleggers in his house, or in his backyard, to make sure no one believes him. Harley isn't captured, in fact, but is taken
So that was the end of part 1 right there. Now part 2 starting.
Officer Harley isn't captured, in fact, but is taken in by a kindly old man. Jack tells his parents that he was lying about Harley. Then once they leave, he goes to investigate the cave himself. Jack finds a bottle and runs into Whit, who is also investigating. Jack and Whit both get captured by the bootleggers. Harley shows up at Whit's End, tells Connie everything was true. Harley drives up to the cave while Connie calls the police. Harley tracks the bootleggers back to their hideout. Harley bursts into the cabin to rescue Whit and Jack. But then the old man who looked after Officer Harley, Mr. McKinley, bursts in on Harley. Then the police show up and arrest everyone.
I think it's just Mr. McKinney.
Yeah. I was like, there's no L in there. I wrote an L, but there isn't an L. What happens?
Yeah, I wrote his name down on my list.
So what happens in the remake, Victoria?
So in The Boy Who Cried Destructo, Lawrence is playing around Wit's End and messes up Eugene's aromatic experiment.
Aromatic.
So the perfume Eugene's making. And Eugene accidentally creates chloroform or some variant thereof. Harlow Doyle pulls up in front of Wit's End on a moped. He and Lawrence ride to Trickle Lake to fight Destructo. And then it cuts to Lawrence bursting in on Whit and Eugene back at Wit's End, claiming that Harlow's been kidnapped. Whit and Lawrence split up. Whit and Lawrence go back there, and Whit gets captured as well. He's thrown in a cabin with Harlow. Lawrence runs back to Wit's End a second time. Eugene won't believe him. Lawrence threatens to phone the police if Eugene won't come, so Eugene caves. Eugene realizes that Lawrence is right, and the bootleggers have Whit and Harlow, and Lawrence is sent to get the police. The henchmen leave Whit and Harlow in the cabin. Whit and Harlow accidentally overload the still as they try to escape the ropes, and the still begins to overheat. Eugene uses the chloroform to incapacitate the henchmen, and he cools the still and releases the captives. Then the police wrap everything up.
So the overlaying plot is basically the same, but there's quite a few differences between them. This is actually probably one of the most different remakes compared to some of the other ones that are almost line by line the same.
I'd say that the next most different one is Harley Takes the Case.
Yeah. I mean, there are some remakes that are even more different than this that had an entirely different central plot, like Gotcha started with a rabbit's foot and also turned into Pranks for the Memories. But in terms of ones that kept the same central plot, this might be the most different one. Okay. Yeah. So for my notes about Harley, I found it really interesting how each generation of kids in this show has the super imaginative kid who could fill this role if the episode was to be remade in that generation. So in the original version, it's Jack Davis, whose imagination we also saw in Rumor Has It and in Heatwave. Lawrence Hodges, who is the kid in The Boy Who Cried Destructo, and he does not need any examples. And he is arguably the most imaginative child in the history of AIO altogether. If this episode had been set in albums 40 to 50, then Trent Dwight would have been the kid to appear in the remake of this episode. The thing that I like about Jack being cast in this role is that while Lawrence is the more over-imaginative child, Jack's parents justified themselves with references. Like, they used Rumor Has It by name, basically, so continuity, which is nice. I mean, I know Lawrence has more general over stuff, and he probably does fit this role better, but I really like the fact that in here, they actually specifically referenced Rumor Has It. So, that's...
Yeah, I like the continuity there, too. This is on my Destructo point, but it's kind of the same as yours. Actually, it's a little different. I put, people thinking Lawrence is crying wolf I find is far more believable than Jack. Because I remember the first time I ever listened to The Boy Who Cried Destructo, I didn't believe Lawrence either when he first came rushing back into Wits End. Because Lawrence talks about evil plots and conspiracies in every single early episode he's in, and some of the later ones too. Whereas Jack, we've only heard do something like this once before. They do justify it with reference back to Rumor Has It, which I really love, and his parents mentioning a couple other things, but you just don't have the same effect.
Yeah, and you brought up something interesting that's also under my Destructo notes, which is that one of the more interesting changes of the remake is that they cut Harlow and Lawrence's initial visit to the cave. They cut straight to him coming back to Wits End.
Well, the problem they had to face was they have a two-parter becoming a one-parter.
Exactly, which is why there's so many differences. Same thing with Harley Takes the Case as a two-parter that became a one-parter when it was remade into Missing Person in album 8.
Yeah, you're going to have to cut a lot of scenes in order to have enough time.
Yeah. So like you said, the really interesting thing about this is that by cutting their initial visit to the cave and Harlow being kidnapped / David Harley being kidnapped, they leave it unknown to the listener in the remake whether or not Lawrence is actually telling the truth. In the initial version, we know that Jack is telling the truth, which there are advantages and disadvantages to both ways that they did it, I think, and we can get into that later.
Yeah, if you put it that way, the cool thing is that I guess it comes with what you're saying. We don't really know that many instances about Jack being, lying about stuff like this with his imagination. So that's why we need to see the whole thing. But with Lawrence, we already know he's like that. So they can kind of just cut all that stuff out. Yeah.
And same thing if Jared and Trent both, if Jared had come in and been screaming. I mean, basically that's what happened to him in Strange Boy in a Strange Land.
Yeah.
No one believed what happened because he always made stuff like that up. For Jack at the beginning, and he's lounging around complaining about how bored he is, I have negative sympathy for kids who say there's nothing to do in Odyssey, or that
I know. And then he's just like, "Why don't you go to Wits End?" Every single time I listen to it,
nothing
and he's like,
exciting ever
Wits
happens
End's okay.
here.
And I'm just like, "Oh yeah, it's not like you've almost been swallowed by a whale there in a story, or like you've gone on the imagination station or anything." It's like, seriously, Jack, just be quiet.
Yeah, he's like, nothing exciting ever happens here. You have Wits End. You are never, ever, ever allowed to say that you were bored. Shut your face. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I have the same reaction every time I listen to the episode too.
I really like the continuity they have between this episode and Harley Takes the Case. Because Harley Takes the Case, they sent David away from Odyssey, and then he comes back in this episode for a return two-parter. And they make reference to his leaving in that he comes back to Odyssey so that he can give Steve Larson a ride on his bike, which is a callback to Harley.
Harley Takes the Case is the child that went missing. In Missing Person, it's Rodney who went missing.
Yeah. Big differences in their personalities between the episodes.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that I love about Return of Harley that I miss the loss of is Connie learning how to drive.
Yeah, that's one of my points too.
Because
it's interesting because this kind of adapts into two things slightly. It kind of adapts into The Boy Who Cried Destructo and also License to Drive.
I completely disagree with that.
Well, like, there's some elements that you can kind of see from License to Drive, but it doesn't have the same theme or anything.
I still
as
completely
License to Drive.
disagree.
I think that they made License to Drive because they had to delete this episode.
I do not agree with that whatsoever.
Fine. Whatever.
If you look, like, I mean, the only similarity is that we have someone who's learning how to drive. Beyond that, the actual specifics of everything that happens, there's zero similarity whatsoever.
Connie almost killed Jack. She almost ran him over.
Yes. So, yeah, we see Connie teach Eugene later on, of course, obviously. And,
Wait, I have a point about this too.
Well, let me get through mine first. So I really miss the fact that we, dropped the storyline of Connie learning how to drive. And it's understandable we couldn't include it because we already knew after that point, before The Boy Who Cried Destructo, we knew definitely that Connie knew how to drive. She'd made reference to it multiple times and had taught Eugene in a License to Drive. So we see her teach Eugene later on, and Whit mentions in that episode that Connie passed her driver's test with flying colors. But this episode suggests that it may have taken a little bit of work to get to that point.
That's why I was going to say that's one of my points. That when you first listen to License to Drive, and then with Connie passed her test with flying colors, she's like all up in Eugene's face. She's like, with flying colors. And you're just like, wow, Connie, okay. But then you go back and you hear this one. Now, whenever I listen to License to Drive, I am killing myself laughing whenever she says with flying colors because I'm like, yeah, okay, Connie. You get to hear Connie being taught by Whit, which is really funny considering how she had such a hard time driving in this episode, even though she passed her test apparently with flying colors, and I really love it. I like how she's like, do you really have to wear a seatbelt when you drive? And then Harley comes up behind her and he's like, yeah, you do.
Okay. No, it was stop at a red light, but yeah.
Oh. But still, like, she's 15 years old. She shouldn't have to ask that.
Yeah. It's funny. Whit tells Jack that Jack scared 10 years off of Whit's life.
Which I can barely afford to lose. And I'm just like, sir, do you even understand anything?
This episode is 26 years old. Whit, you have all the time in the world to lose.
Every single time I hear that, I start laughing too, because I'm just like, Whit, you have nothing but years to lose.
You are literally immortal.
I don't know, maybe Whit is gonna die where we currently are in album 58, and he would have lasted
9?
till album 68 if it weren't for Jack in this one episode.
Do you mean 9?
What?
You mean 59?
Yeah, whatever.
We're not in 58 anymore.
We said 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be 58.
Yeah, but you said where we currently are in 58. But
oh, we're not on album 58, are we?
That's what I'm saying.
Huh.
Okay,
well,
so here's the thing I messaged Phil Lawler about. So I've wondered about this for so long, and when I was doing the stuff for this, I'm like, I finally need to message him and ask him about it. So the funniest thing to me about this whole ordeal is at the end of the first part, Chris asks people...
This is only on the radio version.
Yeah, I don't think it's on the remade version on the OAC. At the end of the first part, Chris asks people to write in and guess what was in the boxes in the cave. And if they get it right, they'll get an AIO poster. And I really I've always wondered so desperately if anyone actually called in, especially because the program was so young and there's still so much innocence. It was before there were so many more darker things. So I really wanted to know if any little kid called in and they're like, it was bootlegged moonshine in the boxes.
I just guy, I think it was bootlegged moonshine.
Yeah. So I was like, for years I was like, I don't even know how I would find out. Like, who would you ask? I mean, my best guess was Phil because he wrote the episode. Other than that, I'm like, I don't even know who you would contact because the writer wouldn't be the one answering the phone and mailing parcels out to people. But I sent him a message anyways. So his response was, and I quote, "My memory of that is that no one ever did, in regards to if anyone got it right. But I believe we still gave away posters to people who sent in a guess, even if it was wrong." And then a couple messages down, he said, "I didn't want to make it so hard that they couldn't guess, but I don't think anyone ever did. So I guess it was harder than I thought. Smiley face." End quote.
It's a child's program. Why would you think they'd guess alcohol?
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. I love you.
Okay, and then so we have Mr. McKinney around.
Wait, let me say some points.
Okay, sorry, cool.
So sorry. So something I like more about this than Destructo is you get to see way more of Jack's struggle with people not believing him and more of the consequences of his actions. My favorite scene in like the first episode is the ending scene when he's like outside and he's just sitting on his deck. And then all of a sudden when the bootleggers comes and he's just like threatening him and it's just like, no one's gonna believe you, you better not tell anyone or else we'll kill your friend.
Makes me think of Sherlock.
It is such a good scene. It's such a good scene for so many different reasons. And it's like, Jack doesn't know what's going to happen. Lawrence never had to deal with anything like that. Yeah. I mean, like, Lawrence's imagination probably created scenarios like that, but Jack actually had to go through someone threatening him to his face to murder Officer Harley for something that was his fault. Imagine how much pressure that must have been on him. And blah 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 blah. There's also more of a sense of peril in this episode because of part one's ending, and yeah, that's everything I just said. So this episode I find certainly more way more threatening than The Boy Who Cried Destructo, because like the bootleggers in this version are way more terrifying, even though they're way more silly than the ones who cried in The Boy Who Cried Destructo. They're more threatening because they actually know where Jack lives, and there's like more.
Yeah, that is the creepy thing, that they don't like approach him like, you know, on the street or somewhere. Like he's in his backyard when the guy sneaks
and then they
up
just
on
like come into his backyard while he's not paying attention, and they're just like, we're gonna murder your friend basically if you try and tell the cops. So I think that the reason that the bootleggers and The Boy Who Cried Destructo are a bit more relaxed and not as much played for laughs is because they kind of balance the two bootleggers' personalities, like the silly side, plus Mr. McKinney's, to kind of create a kind of neutral level-ish, plus a little bit of silliness to lighten the atmosphere.
On the topic of Mr. McKinney, first off, independent point. I will never understand his line where he's like, I don't have a phone. I don't believe in him. I was like, what does that mean? How old is this guy? Phones have been around since the 1800s. They have phones in Marus, for goodness sake. Marus. The old gypsy lady who like does seances in Marus is like, haven't you heard of phones before? Get with the times, girl. Like, if that isn't a technological wake-up call for you, I don't know what is.
Some more stuff about Mr. McKinney is I like his reveal. There are a couple things I've never understood about him. Like, he knows that Harlow escaped and stuff.
No, he doesn't.
But he doesn't?
No, that's the point.
Oh, I thought he did. And I was always like, why are you letting him go? I don't understand. But the great thing about him is you never for a moment suspect that he is the big bad behind everything. And I really love that. Because it's kind of like this really heartbreaking moment at the end. It's just like, you helped me and stuff.
I don't know if I'd say heartbreaking, but...
Well, not heartbreaking, but it's like startling.
Yeah.
Slight feeling of betrayal. And then Harlow's just like, but you helped me and stuff. And I feel really bad for him. I keep on saying Harlow, I think.
Yeah.
Whatever. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's another thing. Okay.
But if
Mr. McKinney?
Can I just say, because that's basically the same thing I wanted to say there. I've always really, really loved the plot twist with McKinney, especially because of what you said about helping him. Because even though he appears so little, it creates a really nice little complex character, even for such a short appearance. Because from what we see, he really does have a genuine desire to help out Harley as, you know, just a regular man in need, so long as it doesn't interfere with his bootlegging operation, and then he's willing to do whatever. And I think that really speaks a lot to people in general, you know, in the world, or like, you know, sure, you know, I want to help people and do good stuff as long as it doesn't cut into my bottom line.
It's like what Hank Murray tried to make Eugene believe he was like in Hold Up. slightly. Somewhat. Because he's just like, I want to help my mom and stuff,
Grandma.
but he's just like, but he was lying about that, so it doesn't really count.
No.
Another thing about McKinney, which I really love, is he's a genuinely threatening and also very, very competent villain. So that just adds another layer to his he's such a good villain thing he's got going on for him. I really, really like Mr. McKinney as a villain. I think he's a very good character.
So that's the end of my notes for Return of Harley.
I have a couple more notes for Return of
go on.
Harley. Let me just make sure I've gotten through everything at the top. Okay, I have two more things. So this is my favorite This is my favorite Harley episode, and it's also my favorite Harley episode. That has two meanings. So out of all the episodes that David Harley's in, on just like a pure storyline, character level, moral thing, it's my favorite. And out of the episodes that Harley appears in, it is my favorite because he's at his very best. He has very few silly moments, and I will always stand by the fact that I never really understood why people were so offended by him, because he has more serious moments than he has silly moments. In this episode, he has like 2 silly moments or something like that, like the stuff with Roger and a couple other things. But other than that, he's played completely straight, and he saves the day at the end. And like, he has the trap and the arrest, and it is so cool, and he gets his revenge, and he's like so smug about it, and I'm just like, oh, you're such a great character, I love you so much, why couldn't you have been in more episodes? And
personally, I think that
makes me happy.
In terms of Officer Harley as a character, I think that Harley Takes the Case is a little bit better than this one. This one is still really good, but I think that he definitely excels beyond anything else in Harley Takes the Case. But
that's the next best one, in my opinion.
That's neither here nor there.
He's also really great in that one. The only reason I'd say he's more like played straight in this one is because he has the whole radio joke going on in Harley Takes the Case, and in this one he has like 2 jokes. Maybe it's because he has less time in this episode.
Yeah, but the other one has him actually having to figure out the mystery, and it also has him, counseling someone else and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways, what's your other point?
That I combined them into one.
Oh.
They were both about him.
Okay, so my points for the other one. I think it's really interesting how it seems like Eugene is studying literally everything at college. Like, I know that he's in comp sci as a program and a degree, but we hear him doing just about, like, everything at one time or another. And creating a perfume is possibly the most bizarre thing that we ever see him doing. Which is I
don't know about that. If we go by the Odyssey videos, because they're very canon, we have the stratifier. I can just imagine if you had a drink, you would have spat it out right there all over your screen.
So I was thinking, like, that's so bizarre. Like, it's at least the other things, it's normally like, at least science related or language or, something like that. And so I started to think about it. And I was like, could there be another reason besides pure academia? And that's when
he was going to give it to Connie.
That's when I realized that this episode is smack in the middle of his early semi-romantic phase with Miss Katrina Shanks. This is the phase.
Oh yeah, it is.
This is the phase.
I was about to say something about Katrina, but then yeah, I guess she was around.
This is right in the middle of the phase when he was writing all those undelivered love letters and phoning her all the time.
Oh.
So I would bet my left shoe that he was not performing an aromatic experiment for the college, but he was making a perfume for Katrina.
That's so sweet! New headcanon accepted. Oh, that's so adorable.
It fits into the timeline smack on with when he would have done something like that.
Aw, Eugene. That's so precious.
Oh, did I accidentally, Oh, that's why there's a line missing from my plot summary for Destructo, because I accidentally wrote it down in my notes. Whip believes Lawrence, and the two go back to Trickle Lake, despite Eugene's strong protest. Which you did notice and filled that in, that there was a gap there, and that's because I wrote it in the wrong spot. Surprised that only happened once. As much as Harlow's arrest is great, I adore Eugene's scene when he knocks out the
I
henchman.
know.
I'm
I put the comedic side plot with Eugene is hilarious.
I'm so happy.
It always made me laugh
I'm
so
so
hard.
happy that he consciously took up the time to come up with a witty one-liner to deliver while he knocked him out with chlorophyll. Perfect
like
for those
Eugene watching old
pressing
Arnold
social engagements
Schwarzenegger
like
movies,
jail.
and he's like, one day I will have my own one-liner. I bet that's the only reason he went with Lawrence.
Yeah, obviously.
And he's like,
had nothing to do
on
with
the way
saving
down,
Whit's
he's driving down, and he's just like, I'll only come if I get to say a witty one-liner when I knock out the sidekick characters.
Yeah. We have 3 little clips from the official guide here before we start doing our conclusion of these 2 episodes together.
I still have more things.
Well, I'll say these things and then we can go over more points.
Okay.
Okay, so behind the scenes. During the summer of 1991, we had rewritten and re-recorded most of the Officer Harley stories as brand new episodes with new characters. However, we had neglected the Return of Harley. I have to say, just to interject there, it is actually crazy. If you look at the episodes in chronological order, not in the order they appear in albums, every single other Harley remake is almost consecutive. Like, because there's 12 Harley episodes that are remade into 10 or 11 remakes, and basically 10 out of those 11 are all consecutive in a row with nothing else between. So, however, we had neglected the Return of Harley. We decided to remake it as a single episode, The Boy Who Cried Destructo. It was the only Officer Harley remake in which Harley's replacement, Harlow Doyle, actually replaced Harley. End quote. That fact really blew my mind when I was going through stuff. Out of all the remakes, this is the only one where Harley is replaced by Harlow.
Really?
Yeah. In the other ones, it actually, come to think of it, in the other remakes, Harlow Doyle didn't even exist yet, which would be why.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Harley is replaced by Whit, by Patrick O'Ryan, and by Eugene, among others, but this is the only...
Isn't he replaced by Jack in one of them? Or is it Kurt?
Kurt, yeah, in Case of the Missing Train Car. Yeah, what happened to the Silver Streak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's replaced by all these other characters. This is the only time Harley is replaced by Harlow in a remake.
Can you imagine if they remade The Boy Who Cried Destructo and they still had Jack hanging around, and it was Jack who took Harley's place, and he's just like, I have a really strong sense of deja vu. Oh, Whit should have said that, actually.
Well, yeah, Jack Davis was still in Odyssey, after all.
Yeah. Whit tells Jack about what happened, and
yeah.
Jack's like, what did you do? And Whit's like, oh yeah, I went through all this stuff with distilled liquor, I know I believed Lawrence, and he's just like, that happened to me.
He's like, do you not
all
remember
those years
this?
ago, you jerk.
When I was in middle school? Yeah, because Jack's last appearance before, super later on is album 23, and this is album 19. So, yeah, as you said, the other remakes replace him with Kurt Stevens, Eugene, Officer O'Brien, Whit, and others.
Dev.
Yes?
Devin. So, do you think Jack's like, we went on this adventure with you and me and that other person. What was his name? And Whit's just like, I have no idea who you're talking about.
There's no Officer Harley in Bossing.
Yeah, they
Say.
actually erased their memories, and that's why in Peace on Earth another episode. Yeah, Harlow Doyle, Private Eye. He's like, do I know you? And he's just like, no. I bet Harlow is actually David Harley, but they Society of the Blind Eye mind.
They Tahiti'd him?
Yeah, they Tahiti'd him, so then he came back, and he's just like, and they're like, you are Harlow Doyle now.
One day when Miss Minion is asking him about why he left Chicago to come to Odyssey, he's like, well, I really love Chicago. It's a magical place. And another reference in this episode, which I never got before, Lawrence yells when he runs into Wit's End, call rescue 911, get Captain Kirk on the phone.
Yeah.
Which obviously I'm like, 911 Star Trek references, obviously. Kind of a double thing I realized here. The reason he says this is because William Shatner was the host of Rescue 911, in addition to, of course, being James Tiberius Kirk on Star Trek, which also makes sense from Hidden in My Heart, because Hidden in My Heart, they have William Shatner being the announcer for Rescue 119, and then he's later in the Star Trek segment as well. So
That
that's
makes a lot of
why
sense now, actually.
I can't hear you at all. Your mic.
I said that makes a lot of sense. I was listening to The Boy Who Cried Destructo last night, and then when Lawrence yelled that, he's like, "Get Captain Kirk on the line!" And I'm like, well, that doesn't date this at all.
Or Rescue 911, either of them, yeah. I know. Hidden in My Heart still happens like another 7 albums later, too. And it's like, yeah, these TV shows aren't dated at all now.
Like, this show's gonna last forever, just like Lassie.
Yeah. And speaking of dogs, segue, while both of these stories are obviously retellings of The Boy Who Cried Wolf, The Boy Who Cried Destructo reflects that parody in its title, whereas the original doesn't, because it's The Boy Who Cried Destructo instead of The Boy Who Cried Wolf.
The thing about Return of Harley, I guess kind of, I don't know if you would consider it a point for Return of Harley or Boy Who Cried Destructo. With Return of Harley, you have no idea what you're getting into. From the title, you're like, oh yeah, Harley's coming back. Okay, but you don't know what's going to happen.
That's a good point.
In The Boy Who Cried Destructo, you know what's going to happen going into it. You're like, Destructo, oh, this must have Lawrence. Boy Who Cried Destructo, oh, it must be Boy Who Cried Wolf. No one's going to believe Lawrence, but it obviously happened. And
that's a very good point.
I don't know, would you consider that a point for Harley or
I would
Destructo?
consider it a point against Destructo.
Yeah.
Not so much for the point of Lawrence, but for the fact that you do know that no one's going to believe him, and you should be able to tell with fair certainty that it is going to turn out to be true in the end. So there's not really there's not as much point in leaving it ambiguous in the episode as there would have been if the title didn't make that, if it didn't give it away.
And then the
Good
episode
point.
ends with Harlow and Wit being eaten.
Yes. By the big bad bootleggers. Okay, so let's compare just the plots of these episodes then, point by
Wait,
point.
I have one more point for Destructo.
Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
So, whereas my favorite scenes in Harley are the ending scene in episode 1, and then in part 1, and then the ending scene in part 2 with like the arrest and all that stuff. My absolute favorite scene, even though the scene with Eugene is hilarious, like those like, here, try our new scent or whatever. My favorite scene in Destructo is the scene when they knock over the thing and then it starts heating up, and like the still, because I don't know, you get kind of more of a sense of jeopardy and suspense, and it's really intense and really dramatic.
One almost might call it Final Jeopardy.
Yeah.
Or even the fact that they were being abandoned in the woods and it was going to blow up. So at the same time, one could also call it Double Jeopardy.
Shush.
Go on.
Okay, so it's really dramatic. It's really well written. I love Wit and Harlow's like little prayer when everything's going on, and then Eugene runs in.
Amen.
And I just really, really love that scene, because even though you have like this huge lingering sense of like suspension and stuff, with like, oh, they're gonna kill Harlow, I guess it's not as much an effect on us because we heard the 2 episodes consecutively, but for people at the time, they had to wait a week. So it's like, you think Harlow's gonna die, you come back a week later, first scene is, oh, he's free. And this one, it's the scene, and it's like, we have like 10 seconds, and then we're gonna die, basically. And then, so I'd say the suspense came across better in that one scene.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to look at the similarities across the plot of these episodes, there are some parts that are paralleled very closely. We established that we have these kids who have really overactive imaginations. We have people set up from the beginning who we can tell are not going to believe the kid. It's Jack's parents and Eugene are both not going to believe Jack and Lawrence. And then we have we have Harley-O pull up on his motorcycle, and they have the whole Roger thing that happens. Oh, yep, there we go.
Yep.
We have the whole Roger thing that happens, to like look back and forth to see the similarities. They both go up to Triple Lake, even though you don't hear it immediately. They both find a van and a cave and stuff, and then someone gets taken. AIOO gets taken.
One more point for Destructo, sorry, is I really like how they use the sound effects to like tell the story, because like I said, they had to cut a bunch of things out, so they had to come up with like really creative ways of telling the story. That's why using Lawrence was such a good idea. And then like just by hearing the sound effect again, you're like, oh snap, he's gone, what are we gonna do? And then Lawrence just runs right away.
Oh, you mean the sound of the gate when Whit gets taken? Okay. I didn't know what you were talking about there for a minute.
And plus, I think they come across as bootleggers more in The Boy Who Cried Destructo. Maybe they realized their mistake with the first one.
They both end up having to run all the way back to town. Jack has to make 2 entire trips around, which must have been exhausting. Trickle Lake all the way to Wits End. That's not a short run. I mean, think about how much Sam complained about riding his bike there. Imagine how much Jack had to run all the way back to town, and then he went up again, and then he had to go all the way back down again.
Sam's just complaining. Jack appears out of nowhere, and he's just like, don't complain about it. And then you appear out of nowhere, and you're like, don't complain about living in Odyssey and being bored.
Yeah, no kidding. So then he tries to convince people. People don't believe him, and obviously there's a whole lot more in Return of Harley there, because there's the whole people don't believe him, and there's the arguments, and then a whole day passes, and the bootleggers find him, and then they threaten him, and then he has to lie to them in order to save, the kidnapped person in question. There's the whole McKinney thing that gets cut out, and then eventually they go up, Whit gets taken, and then they have to come back, and then people believe him. Or in this case, I guess Whit and Jack both get captured. And it's Harley that ends up escaping and bringing the police, so that's the difference. But in the end, the police come, everyone gets arrested, and they rescue him from the cabin where the bootleggers are holding up. And that's about it. So pluses and minuses on both sides. Let's sum up what our pluses and minuses are to each side.
Okay,
if you can think
just
of
a
them
quick
all.
question. The 2 main bootleggers, not McKinney,
Yeah.
which version of them did you like more?
I don't know.
Because I honestly prefer the Harley version, because they seemed way more
Less
competent.
comical.
Yeah. They were more comical, the Harley ones. They had like more jokes and stuff.
I can't really think of them.
But they actually took the time to find out where Jack lives.
That's true. Yeah, they did have more jokes about like sayonara, and like, oh, I hate it when they say that in the movies and stuff. I can't really separate them very well in my mind to think about what they're like apart from each other, so.
The ones in the other one are more like McKinney, but they're just kind of bland and unmemorable compared to the other ones. Plus, they never took the time to like find out all the stuff like about anything about Lawrence.
Well, it wasn't really like took the time to find out. It's just that he literally chased him all the way back to his house.
Well, like they didn't do that in the other one.
Yeah, I know.
So I'd say I like the bootleggers more than Return of Harley.
I guess so. Okay, so that's a point for Return of Harley. Oh, I didn't talk about before. I said in terms of, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but by not knowing whether or not Lawrence is actually telling the truth, there's pluses and minuses to it on both sides. So for the Return of Harley, the plus side to knowing that it is true is that there's, we're able to really understand that there's suspense. We know that Jack's not lying. We know that, someone actually has been kidnapped. There's a real crisis going on. We're also able to see the bootleggers come and threaten Jack. We're able to see this stuff before the reveal would have been made. So it ups the ante a lot. But then the plus side for The Boy Who Cried Destructo is that there's also this mystery in that we have massive amounts of evidence showing that Lawrence has a super active imagination. And so we are also in the same boat as Eugene and Whit in terms of wondering whether or not he's actually telling the truth or not.
The only downside, once again, is it's based on The Boy Who Cried Wolf.
Yeah, the title gives it
away. You knew that going into it. So I guess you could look at it in the way that in The Boy Who Cried Wolf, the original story, he cried wolf and there was no wolf. And then he cried it wolf again, there's no wolf. Cried it the third time, there actually was a wolf. No one believed him. So it could be, you could look at it from the perspective like, oh, Lawrence is just making this up. He's going to say it again later in the episode, and it's actually going to be true, but this time it's not.
Yeah.
So
We knew that
that's
had to
not
be
really
true in the end, and we already had an instance of him crying wolf falsely in the first scene
Yeah.
of the episode. Which is interesting.
I know.
Lawrence gets a scene in the episode where he does that. In Return of Harley, Jack does not get one in the episode. They just make reference to a previous episode, as we said before.
So that's kind of a point for Destructo, and the fact that you know more about Lawrence's active imagination, in my opinion.
Yeah, we have more first-hand knowledge from the episode itself. Although, continuity is always great too. On the other side of the scale, we have McKinney is a huge plus for Return of Harley. We have 2 parts, allowing it to be fleshed out a lot more and more complex story, which is more points for Return of Harley.
Gotta admire Destructo for the ways that it was able to do a 2-part story in 1 part. It didn't really cut that many corners, which is really impressive, because the way it told it using Lawrence and sound effects and kind of certain lines and, I don't know, kind of, I can't say visuals because it's radio, but like mental visuals that it creates, like the imagery it creates through everything, it kind of can take those shortcuts, and it does pull it off very well.
I have to give some points to Destructo for the fact that Lawrence, as a character overall, he fits into the whole, ethos of The Boy Who Cried Wolf better than Jack does, even though they both had active imagination. Lawrence fits better into the idea of if he says something, then there's a much better chance that he would be making it up compared to Jack. So that's a plus.
And then we
there.
have both of our comedic side plots in both stories. I'm going to kind of call it Connie learning how to drive a comedic side plot, because I don't know what else to call it.
Are you comparing that to Eugene's perfume?
Yeah, I kind of want to give them both points, because it's really cool for hearing Connie learn how to drive. Mm-hmm. But in terms of comedy, I would say The Boy Who Cried Destructo is more of a funny episode, but it's not really supposed to be that much of a comedy in The Return of Harley.
Yeah.
So, shrug. Point for both, I guess.
Yeah.
Are you keeping a tally, Devin?
No, I'm not. We're not assigning literal points. I think we all know which episode's going to win here. Through what else? What other points did we say? So yeah, McKinney is huge points because that was awesome.
McKinney gets 1 point for being a great villain, 1 point for existing, and 1 point for the great reveal at the end.
Point to Destructo for Eugene's scene. I think not just the whole aromatic thing, but his scene with the one-liner and knocking him out using the perfume and everything.
Do you think he rehearsed it on the way there in the driving mirror? The rear view mirror? Do you think he rehearsed it? Because he didn't have a mirror in his bathroom on the spot, and he's like, I have to rehearse this so it's perfect when
rehearsed.
I say it.
I thought you said reversed. I thought you said he reversed his car, and I was like, what
and
are you
then
talking about?
he's practicing it in the mirror, and then Lawrence is like, Eugene, what are you doing? And he's like, hush, child, I agreed to take you here, so
give me my
at
moment.
least let me have this.
I will have my day. I've been a closet thespian for the majority of my lifetime. I knew there was something odd about you. Oh. Okay, so yeah, I think that about sums up all of our points for going back and forth.
I think the ending of part 1 deserves its own point, that last scene.
So Victoria,
I really love that scene. What?
What would you rate The Return of Harley parts 1 and 2?
It's one of my favorite episodes. I have so many good things to say about it, which I have said. I'd say 5 stars.
And The Boy Who Cried Destructo?
This was one of my favorite episodes for such a long time. So I would feel really bad for giving it less than 5 stars. I think I'll give it 4.9 or 4.8, something like that.
Because remember, if you give him the same number, then you're saying that you're declaring no winner in the verses. So.
Oh, okay. Probably 4.5 if it's just comparison, because I think they both work really well as standalone episodes. But I just think that Return of Harley did the plot way better, so like 5 stars for that. I'd give Boy Who Cried Destructo, I don't know, like 4.3, 4.5, 4.4, something like that.
4.4 then.
Yeah, 4.4.
All right, and Return of Harley, I will give. I think I will give Return of Harley a 4.6 out of 5. Boy Who Cried Destructo, a 4. Yes.
So ours are both.
So we have both
Couple
declared the
points
winner
off.
to be The Return of Harley Parts 1 and 2. So first episode of Versus is done. Ding, ding, ding.
Versus
TKO for The Boy Who Cried Destructo. Reigning champion. The Return of Harley Parts 1 and 2.
next time we do a versus, be there or be somewhere else, to quote Rodney Rathbone.
Yeah, but that will not be next week on the Oddcast, because next week, or 2 weeks, on the Oddcast will be...
I don't know.
We'll be reviewing The Cure, Part 2.
Okay.
Next part. And then we'll be able to listen to Part 3, finally. The Cure, Part 2, as well as...
I haven't listened to part 2 yet. I just realized that. Don't make that face at me.
The Cure Part 2, as well as in preparation for Easter, because next time will be our March review.
Oh, the Imagination Station Revisited.
Part 1, yes.
Because Devin prefers that over the original, even though we could have totally done a versus
And
for Revisited.
we probably will do a versus one day comparing Imagination Station and Imagination Station Revisited. See, like I said, Harley episodes aren't the only ones that are capable of having verses about them. So we may do one about that one day. I don't know. For the time being, we're going to be doing a review of it. So next time, review of The Cure Part 2 and Imagination Station Revisited Part 1. Until then, thank you for joining us on our side of the YouTube.
Thanks.
I've been Leonard Meltzner, also known as Devin Francis.
Thanks.
And until next time, this has been the Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast.
I'm Victoria.
Goodbye.
Bye.